Hey there and welcome back to Best Practice TV. In this episode, my mate Andrew Barrett stops by. We're talking about all things safety culture, safety leadership, leadership development. Who knows where this is going to go? So stay tuned. We are curating the people that talk about leadership. They talk about strategy. They talk about scorekeeping, marketing. They talk about rules. They talk about management. They're telling us about their life, they're telling us about their careers, they talk about innovation, creativity, they're here to help you, it's talking business, this is Best Practice TV. Let's get straight into it. So, I know who you are, you're amazing, but for our audience, can you maybe give us a bit of an insight into sort of who you are, what you're passionate about, and just, maybe start to talk about this great thing that you're doing out there.
Absolutely. So, I suppose people call me a health and safety person, which I don't really probably like, in the sense that most people think that that's all about what you get caught up in your day-to-day. Health and safety is an outcome associated with good work and good business and good life, arguably, if you're taking that holistic view. Absolutely. And so I've worked in health and safety for a long period of time, and I sort of got to a point where I realised that we could start to do things a little bit differently. And I like to rattle the cage a little bit. I like to think outside the square a bit. And so I got to a point where I thought, well, maybe we can do some things differently. And I love experimenting. I love trying new things and learning from those kinds of experiences. Whether it works or doesn't work doesn't matter. And so one of those experiments that we did was to start a podcast. So the idea is I love helping other people who work in health and safety. That's really, really rewarding for me. And I thought, well, how can we actually leverage this a bit more? How can I make a bigger dent in the world? And so the podcast was a bit of an experiment in that. There wasn't really anyone podcasting regularly in Australia, at least, on the topic of health and safety. And so I decided to be the first.
Wow, that's an opportunity. First in. So look out for that. We'll put the links in the description of this video. Is the Safety on Tap podcast, and Andrew graciously showed me last night to just find, if you're an iPhone user, the purple podcast button. So there we go. So we just we'll put that picture in the description, but straight there into there you go, my podcast. So Safety on Tap there, and
in feed.
Look at that. The evidence in less safety probably is more safety.
That's one of those topics that we really like to explore. So we sort of try to break the convention and the status quo. So I met a lady recently, or a little while ago, who was doing some research, so some PhD research, evidence-based safety practice, which actually looked at less safety, so less obvious safety procedures, policies, all that sort of stuff, and whether that actually translated into better health and safety outcomes. And it did.
Fantastic. So, and then episode 36, supercharge your performance and find an extra day in every week, with Charles Jennings.
That's a beautiful business case. If you want to talk about good health and safety, good learning, good business, then you can do some of the simple tips that we talk about in that episode with Charles Jennings, and you can get a 30% increase in productivity. And there's a secret there. Do you want to talk about the secret?
No, that is, which episode is it?
37 or something like that.
36. Okay, so episode 36, don't give it away because I want people to go and listen to that podcast. So episode 36, we'll put the link to that podcast in the description. You had this really famous guy on there a while back. I was just looking for that one.
John Green?
No, me.
Oh, yeah.
Episode 16.
We can cut that bit out.
Too much shit, focus on outcomes. That's exactly right. So I guess the point we're talking about there, and a lot of these, it's all about, or my view there was about outcomes focused.
Absolutely.
Just focus on, all right, what is it that we're trying to measure? What is it that we're trying to achieve? And just reverse engineer it. We want to be here. That's like your map. You're going to go on a road trip. We want to go there. Okay, well, how are we going to get there? We're going to just float along, and we don't know when and how, and the resources we're going to use, but we can't afford that luxury in business. We've got to be health and safety or finance or marketing, whatever it might be. That's where we want to get to. How do we get there as quickly as possible using the resources we've got?
That's right.
And so,
and I think one of the best questions you can ask yourself when you're thinking about that, because that might sound a little bit scary, but you can ask yourself and you can go, if I took something away today, would there be an outcome associated with that? So if I took away a procedure, or if we didn't do some training or something like that, something simple, practical in your day-to-day work, if we took that away, what would happen? And I think when people, and this is where it starts to get uncomfortable, but uncomfortable is where we start to learn and grow. That goes to that point, which is it actually contributing to the outcome?
Totally. It's just bullshit. Tons of it. So about this too much shit in the middle, let's just talk a bit more about that. So shot a really interesting Talking Business episode yesterday with Matt Bradley, and that'll drop soon. He's process automation engineer.
Yeah, right.
And just really looking at, so this tendency of humans in this area, so the business we're in and the industry we're in, to create lots and lots of policies and procedures.
Yeah.
And he's talking about, well, yeah, that's the case, but from a quality perspective, process engineering and process automation, so that you sort of remove all that because you give the job to a machine to do.
Yep.
My question to you, which is a bit of a common theme of these few episodes that we've been shooting, is, in your experience, what advice have you got for a systems manager, someone who's, working within a team, a bit of pent-up frustration around, I'm trying to execute.
Yep.
What's your advice on how to pitch it?
So it's all about the WIFM, the what's in it for me.
The what's in it for me.
Right. The WIIFM.
Yep.
That's where I would start. So I think that with the systems manager, as you just said, who's trying to implement, I think that that's already starting with the system manager and assuming that whatever it is theirs to implement.
Yep.
It's theirs. It's not anyone else's who actually needs to do the work.
Yeah, right.
So I think that's a really good place to start.
Yeah, right.
So you might sit there and say, I know what the requirements are of the ISO standard or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that's true. That's why you've got a job. That's why you get paid, hopefully, good money. But it doesn't mean that you need to necessarily create all of the things that go towards meeting the requirements of that. That's where I would start. And I think that that's quite uncomfortable to say, well, that's my thing. I bring a system or I make a manual or whatever it is. And so you can be quite vulnerable in the sense of saying, actually, let's not me as a systems manager create all of that stuff. Let's actually describe the goal, where we're trying to go. Begin with the end in mind, and then engage the people in the business who actually need to do the work, and then crowdsource, to use that popular term, what that's going to look like. Because I can guarantee you, I've done plenty of this stuff in my time, and there's an inverse relationship between how much I talk to other people and the success of what I do, which is that the more I talk to people where am I going with that? The more I talk to people about what the solution should look like for them, the more successful it's going to be. The less I actually talk to people about that, despite the fact that it might meet the requirements of the standard or whatever requirement we're trying to meet, the less likely it is going to be to work in the real world, which is where work happens.
And that's a really interesting point. I'll give you a real life example of that. We get clients come to us with a pack of templates they've bought, and that's the classic example. Whether you're a systems manager internally or a consultant, I see it time and time again. They say, I've got this system. They put the manual down on the table. Here it is. And you guys read it.
Yep.
Do your review. Does it comply? And we'll be like, yeah, sure, it complies. But then you go out on site, no one's using it. Yeah. Blow the dust off it, for each audit. They haven't touched it, haven't read it. It's not live, it's not real, because you're exactly right, it wasn't created. So we see that 95% of the time. So the question is, are you one of those companies? So that's a really valuable piece of advice, is let, and I guess it's what I campaign, is let them develop it.
Yeah.
So
that's uncomfortable because we feel like we need to be the experts with all the answers. I mean, one of the things that I do, you talked about safety on tap connected. So there's sort of two things that we focus on in trying to make a dent in the world in a health and safety sense, at least. So one of those is helping health and safety professionals. So those people in those businesses, that's at the big end of town because they can afford to have those people. So that's where safety on tap and safety on tap connected supports them.
Yeah.
But in order for me to keep sharp, I sort of went, well, if I'm serious about making a dent in the world with health and safety, then small and medium business is where the greatest need is, and there's no jobs, and there's very little interest, there's very little commitment and very little support from regulators and from consultants and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I continue to keep my skills sharp by experimenting with ways of engaging small and medium business. And my clients, I sit down with them and we've got a program that we work through to work towards better health and safety, and we talk to them about what that looks like. And the amount of clients who say, I've got one client at the moment who said, we went to the Chamber of Commerce and we bought the program, and these are small and medium businesses where this is a lot of money. A couple of grand is a lot of money. And they're saying, listen, this is what we've got. And I just push it to the side and I say, right, let's do this properly now. and we start with nothing on the table. And so we start then talking about what is their genuine commitment. So we get their words, and so we start to talk about the sorts of things that the systems people watching will go, yeah, okay, cool, policy and commitment and all this sort of stuff, and we work through it. But it's not about the paper.
That's right.
And so I've got this one client who literally, I keep saying to them, you can put that in the bin now, and they can't let go of it because that's what they've invested in. So my mission is to actually say, let's avoid that investment in the first place.
I totally agree.
Let's start with the first principles.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I will probably upset people in saying this who follow our videos, and you'll probably unfollow us. But this is a piece of advice: is stop producing templates. Just stop it. Stop producing. Stop selling templates. They don't get used. They don't add value. And stop buying templates.
Yeah.
We need to stop this. The standards have moved away from having lots and lots of documents to this, it's a different language, but to this other point. So stop producing templates, stop writing documents, have these conversations. So if we sort of go one more step with that, if you think about your winning formula, so we start having the conversations about, that we have the conversation about the end in mind, if you like. Then we have the conversation that starts to place the problem in the mind.
Yep.
And so, the solution lies in the mind with the problem. And so that's part of that. That's right. And the opportunity, the reflective questioning techniques that you talk about. What's the next step? So so they don't feel too anxious. At what point in time can they create something? Now, I'm not saying create a policy. At what time? What's the first thing that they start to look at creating? And I just want to see if you've got the same idea as I do.
It's a good point. So I would look at the role. So when you talk about creation, I would again still say you shouldn't be a creator. If you are the systems manager.
Yeah. So if we're now talking to the business owner.
Yep.
So we're now talking to the business owner and the operations manager.
Yep.
And so the maybe there's not a systems consultant now. Maybe we're just talking straight to the business.
Beautiful.
Maybe this is a piece of advice for me.
Yep.
With my business.
Yep.
So then I can start to say, okay, well, I've got to obviously look at, all right, I know where I want to go.
Yep.
So I want to have zero harm.
Yep.
For example, if we just use safety, or I've got a set of financial objectives, I've got a set of quality objectives with my customers. It's the same process.
Yep.
We start and have the conversations, and we're sitting, spitballing and just riffing around what our ideas are.
Yeah.
What's that look like, that next step?
So I think I would use one word, which is a big word, and I don't like big words. I would call it self-determination.
Yeah.
So that would be the guide that I would use for that process.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is that the people who are doing the work need to self-determine when to do that. And so documenting something is about trying to capture what already happens and to try and replicate that in a form that is fixed in time.
Yep.
It's a reflection on apparently what happens in reality.
Yep.
And so one of the biggest problems with systems is that systems are documented, and in the health and safety space at least, there's a lot of people who talk about work as imagined, which might be the process on paper or what the business owner thinks, and then work as done. And so the objective is to make sure that there is no gap between work as imagined and work as done. The easiest way to do, because that's also where you get into trouble. That's where you have customer satisfaction issues and quality issues, and incidents occur, and you walk into a courtroom if someone gets hurt and they say there's quite obviously a difference between work as imagined and work as done, and everyone will know that when it goes wrong. It's not just about hindsight. And so the closer you can get that together, the better it is. The way to do that, again, goes back to getting the people who do the work to actually decide, to self-determine when they need to capture something or formalise something or document something.
Yeah, right.
So I'll give you an example. So one of the small business clients that I work with, the process that we go through obviously starts with making sure that they prioritise their effort.
Yes.
So it's risk-based. And so in their business, they have trucks and salespeople on the road. So despite the fact that a lot of the conversations start with fire extinguishers and trip hazards and testing and tagging and all the immediate things that people think are safety, I said, well, where do your people spend most of your time? So we actually start with this idea of what I call the business blob. So just paint a picture of your business from start to finish, inputs and outputs, that sort of quality process. And so in the business blob, you go, oh, right, well, we've got a lot of people on the road. So then we start to focus their attention in on what's their top risk. And if that's the only risk in the time that I deal with them that they look at, then I'll be happy. because that's the 80-20. So then we sit down with them, we say, okay, cool, so what have we got in place to actually make sure that that's under control, that we are managing that risk? And this business is probably, again, a little bit different from a lot of small businesses. They had the luxury, they had the foresight to have a vehicle monitoring system in place, which they got with some funding associated with some tech that they had. So they had a vehicle monitoring system in place. And so I asked the question of them. Again, I've got lots of answers, but it's not necessarily going to be the right answers because they come from me. And so I said to them, well, how are we going to actually make sure that we are learning from what's going on, workers imagined versus workers done, and then how can we use that to make sure that we are keeping that risk under control using this system? And so they said, well, we get some data out of the system. I'm like, okay, cool. What does the data tell us? And so we unfold a story of how they get insights as to what happens. Now, it's not all about the data and the system. They're also engaging their people and saying, well, what do you think works well with driving? When are we driving unsafe? What about the long country trips that we have to do where fatigue becomes a challenge, or where we're under pressure because they have seasonal work? And so in a particular time of year, they're more under pressure with longer runs and more customers and that sort of stuff, right? So we're starting to understand the risk. But coming back to documenting and capturing and turning what is happening in real life into, say, a system or a process, they then said, well, we can use this system to provide some insights as to our driver behaviour. How might we then use that as feedback for our people as to how they're going? And so the system's clever. So it gives them a ranking, a risk ranking, I suppose, based on their speeding behaviour, their braking behaviour, whether they're wearing a seatbelt. And so going through that process then, we said, right, well, how can we actually use this in a gamified, competitive, engaging way to actually have an ongoing discussion with their staff? So they came up with a scoreboard. And so they said, right, well, let's actually put everyone on the scoreboard. So there's no hiding, everyone's on there, and then we work out where people are. It had a traffic light, so they put a traffic light thing on it. You're in the green, you're in the orange, you're in the red. And so then the discussion started to be, well, how can people engage in their own decisions and with each other socially, so the boss doesn't have to do anything, because the lunchroom conversations start to happen. Man, you're in the red, Kobe. Like, what's going on? I don't know. You know what? Well, it's actually, and they start to self-reflect. And then it starts to go, how as a team can we get people out of the red into the orange, out of the orange into the green? So that's a good example of where I could have done all of that as soon as I saw the system, because I've worked with systems a lot and data and that sort of stuff. And I could have given them the answer straight away, and they would not have got that outcome.
And they wouldn't have done anything about it.
Correct, that's right.
Improved.
Because it wasn't invented here.
That's right.
So that's a big one.
Yeah.
Long story short.
Absolutely. So moving on to talk about the next venture, well, not the next venture, the venture that we're talking about at the moment, which is Safety on Tap Connected. So without sort of letting massive cats out of the bag and that sort of stuff, just talk us through where that's at.
Sure. So with the podcast Safety on Tap, our mission is to help leaders who want to grow themselves and drastically improve health and safety along the way. So the idea is that if we have these sorts of discussions, the stuff that Kobe puts out, the stuff that I'm putting out, the idea is that we're trying to open our minds to different ways of working. Because I think for the vast majority of people, they would to some extent identify with the idea that I continue to do more stuff, but I don't feel like I'm getting a proportionate result. And so if you were to draw that on a graph, the effort against the result, it starts to drop. And so and then it starts to flatten out. It plateaus. And so we continue to do more, but we're not seeing a return on whatever that means. And so I think that at that point in time, firstly, you've got to be starting to get concerned about your job as to whether or not you're adding value.
Absolutely.
So that's the first one. And so in that sense, we sort of went, well, the way that we develop ourselves, I think, has traditionally been, as systems people and health and safety people, has been, well, let's go to a course. Let's read a book. Let's go to a conference or something like that. And if you're lucky, your boss might pay for it. There might be a budget for it. And so there's what I call the flash in the pan learning. And so it's a point in time, and then we consume it. It's like a download. Someone else is downloading. We're downloading now, right? And so with that kind of download, there's only a very small amount that you're actually going to retain out of this. That's a fact. As much as we'd like it to be more. Because it is one way. And so we sort of sat down and we went, well, with Safety on Tap, we're doing the same thing. And people said, well, you're creating lots of great content and I'm having trouble keeping up. And I sort of thought, am I maybe just creating more noise? Am I creating more stuff that people feel like they're drowning in that isn't really contributing proportionately to the result? And so I spent a long time then thinking on, well, how do we learn? How do we develop? How do we grow? And so there's a model called the 70-20-10 model. That's the podcast that we just talked about, episode 36, where we talk about that. And the idea really quickly is that we only learn a very small proportion from a direct download, from knowledge transfer. That's mostly how school and uni works, things like that. Reading a book, listening to a podcast, watching a video. And so then I went, well, how can we actually try and broaden how we support the development of people? So there's two things that we did there. One is that we went, well, more learning happens in a social context and in experience, just getting stuff done, and it needs to happen over time. So development is a long game that we play. And so that's where we sort of went, well, that's Safety on Tap Connected in a nutshell, is bringing together those broader elements of learning in a really intentional way so that we can game effectively, we can design better development by using smart learning techniques and a place to be and intentional activity, intentional behaviour.
Okay. So what does that look like for me? So if I want to start participating in that, and where it's a virtual exercise, but because we're one-on-one at the moment. Let's spend a minute taking me through that journey.
Yeah, cool. So if you want to be part of the Safety on Tap Connected community, what we start with is to make sure that you've got a commitment. So when you become part of the community, it's an online community because we're trying to leverage how we can connect with people.
So mental gym?
In this, absolutely. Absolutely right.
Mental gym. So there's mental gyms, mental gym membership.
Absolutely. And so what we also want to be able to do is to connect globally. So it's a silly idea, I think, for us to restrict how we learn, for example, in a social network to just the people in our suburb or in our state or in our professional association. So we've got plenty of people, for example, crying out in North America who want to do more. So you'd be getting into a community and be going, right, cool, well, what can I learn from the Canadians or the Americans or the Colombians or whatever? So you come into the community and there's a really specific and intentional onboarding that we go through. And so it's sort of like if you go to a conference or you do a course, how often do you really get a good idea about what my intention is for that time? We sort of just wander in and it's almost like it's unspoken. But we then walk out and then you go, well, did you achieve what you set out to achieve? Well, if you're not really clear on that, then you can't really measure that outcome. So we go through this onboarding process, and the onboarding process breaks down how the community works. So the first part of the community that we talk about is the coaching component. And for me, that's the linchpin. So social learning is how we learn from others. Coaching is one form of that. So I learn from you. I love hanging out with you. That's an example of that, a coaching, mentoring type relationship. And so we talk about how that works. And so coaching starts with a model that we use. It's sort of like the GROW model, which is, but I call it better, now, how. And so we want to work out where are we now? Where's the better? Which is what's the goal that you want to achieve or the problem that you want to solve, and then how are we going to get there? And so that's how we'd start, Kobe. Is that we'd come in and I would say to you, your first job is to hit me up and either tell me one of two things. What is your goal? So what do you want to achieve? Or what do you not want to have? What do you want to move away from? And I think sometimes we get caught up in goals. I'm not a big fan of goals, but some people are clear on what they want to achieve. But it might be that you've just got something that you don't want, that you want to stop, a challenge that you face. So you might start with that and say, I've got a problem with trying to get my processes implemented as a systems manager or whatever. And so we start with that. And then I start to build a picture as we go online back and forth, and we get an understanding of what that goal actually looks like. We clarify that, because often what you start with on the surface maybe isn't necessarily what you want or what you need to work with. So that's part of my job as a coach, is to ask really good questions to clarify that and start to open your mind. And then the coaching process begins with going, here is step one. And so then we work through a process so that you start to, as you say, work out your path. So we're not meandering randomly towards whatever that future looks like. It's really intentional. So it's like being on railway tracks. So you're straight and we know where we're going, and then we start to put the stations in between. And then we go, right, so there's the first station. Don't worry about what's after that, because we're going in that direction on the railway tracks.
Awesome.
And so stuff falls on the tracks, you know, logs and cows and all this sort of stuff, that will happen. And so you'll say, you know what, I tried this first thing, this is the first initiative that we did, and it didn't work, it failed, you know. And we've got a challenge, and that's entirely okay because that's how we learn and grow. So then we understand that, we unpick that, and then we go, cool, so let's push it out of the way.
That's right.
And then we keep moving.
That's exactly right.
So that's a bit of a flavour of how the coaching works.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I live and breathe one of my fridge magnets at home, which is, you know, someone bought it for me and it's gone up on the fridge, and we'll try and get a picture of it for you for Instagram. But it says, proceed as if success is inevitable.
Yeah.
And I got a big black texter and I crossed out as if. It's proceed, success is inevitable.
Yeah.
So it's just, you know, that's just a log or a cow, whatever it is on the track, or that's just a barrier. So it's about pulling in from Safety on Tap Connected, pulling in some of those skills of how to clear the barriers.
Absolutely.
So it's, all right, that's the task. With no barriers, it's easy. We're going to have a few barriers. How are we going to push those things out of the way?
Absolutely. And that's the cleverest thing about, I think, the learning model. What we're doing is we're just translating other good stuff. We talked about that recently, about what was your comment about Van Gogh?
Oh no, it's Picasso. It's Picasso. So great artists copy and amazing artists steal.
So I've just stolen a learning model and we're replicating that in our context. And so things like coaching, I didn't invent that, but we can use that to leverage people's growth.
Absolutely.
Things like social learning. So I don't have all the answers, and that's one of the differences between coaching and mentoring.
Yeah.
Where I might not have direct experience of your job or your industry or whatnot, but that doesn't matter because where we make up for that. So coaching will absolutely drive us forward. There's no question about that.
You bring your industry experience. So I will bring my industry experience. You will bring the mechanisms to make me as efficient as possible to get to my target.
Absolutely, but the cleverest bit is that it's not all about me in that sense, because we've got an entire community of people who are invested in their own learning. And so part of our onboarding also talks about the idea of social learning. And so if you want to learn socially, we connect everyone in the community such that they can get out as much as they put in. So if you want to learn socially, if you want to rely on other people's experience, you want to tap someone on the shoulder in Colombia who works in your industry, then you can riff with them and you can bounce off them, but you've got to give back as well.
That's exactly
right. So then at that point in time, we're then turning, you know, if you think about the conference or the training course or whatever, you've got maybe one or a couple of people who might be teaching. At that point in time, we've got dozens and hopefully hundreds of people that you can learn from. So you imagine the kind of leverage you can get out of your development from that. Absolutely. So we're running out of time, and we want to hold people's attention. So this is your opportunity to have these guys, our community, help you. So it's a piece of advice. So it's Safety on Tap is the podcast. Safety on Tap Connected is this amazing community. There isn't one single person out there watching these videos who wouldn't get benefit from your community. Like, absolutely, and I don't say this very often, but every single one of you individually, have a look at Safety on Tap Connected. It's absolutely amazing. I'm going to be in there, so you'll see me in there. You'll get an opportunity to learn and get my ideas and engage with me directly on an equal standing perspective, because I'm still learning. Like, you know, it's early in the morning here at the Best Practice head office, and I've already, you know, I was up this morning at 10 to 5 trying to knock out as much as I could out of Tony Robbins' new book, Unshakable. You know, we're just talking about that in the car on the way down here this morning. So watch the sunrise, I'm trying to squeeze as much in as possible. So I'm going to get into that community because I see that as a great opportunity for me to learn even faster and to grow best practice even faster and to get our message out there. But so you've got to get straight in there. So your airtime right now is for this community. They're going to help you. You guys are all going to jump in and give Andrew some help. What's your challenge? What's your question for this community that they can help you with? And I'll try and give you a piece of advice, but the community's there to help you too. What is it? So I think that I would describe it as what I think is the big invisible group that I'm trying to help. And I call them invisible because they get into work and they do their jobs and they're effectively on their own. So it doesn't matter whether you're in a team or whether you're sort of the solo person that does what you do in a business. But I call you invisible, and you might be part of this group because you don't engage. And there's plenty of people for plenty of reasons why that happens. And so the challenge that I'm trying to help people with, and I'm trying to understand as well, is how do we get people to connect? And so it doesn't matter if you don't join Safety on Tap, if you don't listen to the podcast, that's fine. But how do you yourself then actually take actions to then start to connect with others and your own development. And so how do you start to take a positive action today in order to develop yourself, which is beyond you, beyond your own, sort of reading a book or whatnot. That would be the challenge.
So the challenge is, there's the challenge set, we're looking for some assistance with solutions with getting people to activate. And so the anonymous observation or voyeurism of social media, we're trying to break that down because that's the way that this stuff's going to improve, is by having you guys connect. So for those of you out there in the community that know how to get people to act or people to respond, so it's, it's not manipulating people, but it's baiting people so they'll respond in a positive way. So if you've got some tips and tricks for Andrew and myself in terms of, it is a challenge because we put out this content and we worry that we're not influential enough, or we worry we're not doing enough to help you. We know we're helping people because the views are starting to grow and the likes are starting to grow, and it's not about the views and the likes, it's about getting some response. But that's the only metrics we've got that we can get back. So if you guys can send a direct message, we'll put Andrew's LinkedIn handle. You can find him on Twitter. I'm not a massive user of Twitter. I'm trying to learn, but definitely LinkedIn. So LinkedIn's the place that I love, and I'm in there 3 and 4 and 5 times a day. So a direct message to Andrew on LinkedIn if you've got tips and tricks that could help, or just a couple of little, what you think works, what's worked for you to get people to actually action and come out of that anonymous view. So
we'll share that.
Absolutely, we'll share it. Absolutely,
we'll
put it back out there. Yeah. So if we, we'll summarise all of your comments and we'll put that together. So I think my piece of advice, I've got one piece of advice, which is that people are scared of being rejected.
Yeah.
And so they're sort of unlikely to sort of comment, or like or post. Because they're scared of rejection, or they're scared of sort of the community. They put themselves out there, and look, I think the reality is it's okay to feel vulnerable, and that's okay. Like, you just, once you've had a go at it and you just get into it, it just becomes part of normal life. So right. I think that don't be scared of being rejected. Now, rejection in itself, if you do get rejected, that's not a bad thing, because it's just someone going, don't make up that they hate you or they don't like you. It's just like that's just not for them.
Yeah.
So you're just with someone that's, the people that don't reject you, you are for them. Yeah. So I think, when you do make those comments and you buy into these communities and you do reach out and you do comment, just have an understanding that it's just okay. And maybe that's the message we've got to put out there, is like, it's okay to comment. Yeah. Because we're not going to reject you. I respond to every single message that I get on LinkedIn. Yeah. Every single one. I ask people to send me messages on LinkedIn, and so does Andrew. So you're not going to get rejected. There's never a silly question. There's never a silly comment. There's never something that I'm going to go, oh, that's stupid. And even the haters that send me hate messages, I'm like, that's cool, because that's not my shit. That's your shit. And hate me as much as you like. I've inspired you to act, and I've influenced you, and that's all I'm doing. So the more that you hate me, the better. That's exactly right. Yeah. So I think there's that piece on, it's that whole mindfulness piece. I don't care. I'm old enough now, and I've got my priorities and my goals, and someone's going to hate on me. So what? And so I think that's the advice to you guys there. And that's probably what we've got to understand. So, okay, how do we get people to act? Because no one's going to hate you for it. Yeah. And it's about, everybody recognises that you're trying to learn, and the way that you provide comments, and everyone sat in a training course where there's someone in the corner that doesn't stop talking. Yeah. That's just that person's form of learning. Yeah. So as much as everyone else gets annoyed, I wish that person had shut up. It's just, that's how they're learning. So you've got to try and build your own skills to block that out. So
great advice.
So thanks for stopping by.
Thank you for having me.
This has been absolutely fantastic. We will get this episode out as quickly as we can to you guys. This has been Talking Business on Best Practice TV. Look for this guy on LinkedIn. Go to your podcasts right now. Podcast Safety on Tap. Jump in there and start following those Safety on Tap podcasts. That's it. Now, more importantly, I would like everybody to click on the link and have a look at Safety on Tap Connected. I will be there. I'm going to be in there. We're launching it with Andrew as part of Best Practice. So we're going to help get some traction with our community, and this is part of this exercise. So look for that. And don't be scared, subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button up the top. You're going to get more of these great Talking Business episodes, and we will see you next time on Talking Business right here in the YouTube room at Best Practice TV. Bye for now.
Yeah.